Right now the temperature outside is probably somewhere between 15 and 30 degrees. Maybe you have a jacket on. Maybe you turned the heating up this morning. Maybe you complained that it was a little cold on the way to work. Now imagine that temperature drops. And keeps dropping. And does not stop. Not for a week. Not for a month. For 100,000 years. Welcome to the Ice Age. The single most brutal climate event in the history of the human species. A period so cold and so violent and so relentlessly deadly that it killed off almost every large animal on the planet. Almost. Because one small group of creatures refused to die. They had no heating. No insulation. No weather forecast. No emergency services. No government handing out survival kits. Just their hands. Their minds. And each other. And somehow they not only survived. They thrived. This is how they did it. Let us start with what the Ice Age actually was. Because most people picture it wrong. They picture one big freeze. One moment where everything suddenly goes cold and stays cold. That is not what happened. The Ice Age was not a single event. It was a cycle. A brutal, relentless rhythm of freezing and thawing that played out over millions of years. Temperatures would drop. Glaciers would advance. Entire landscapes would be buried under sheets of ice kilometers thick. Then temperatures would rise slightly. The ice would retreat. And just when life started to recover, it would drop again. Ancient humans lived through multiple cycles of this. And every single time the cold came back it was trying to kill them. At its worst the Ice Age dropped global temperatures by between 8 and 15 degrees Celsius below what they are today. That does not sound like much until you understand what it meant on the ground. In Northern Europe temperatures regularly dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius in winter. In what is now France and Spain, the landscape looked like modern Siberia. In North America entire regions were buried under ice sheets 3 kilometers thick. And in Africa where most ancient humans lived, the cold brought something arguably more deadly than frost. It brought drought. Because when water freezes it stops moving. Rivers slow. Rainfall drops. Lakes shrink. And the plants that animals and humans depended on for survival begin to disappear. The Ice Age did not just make the world cold. It made the world empty. So what did ancient humans actually do? The first thing they did was go underground. Archaeological sites across Europe and Asia show that ancient humans during the coldest periods were building semi-subterranean shelters. Not caves. Not tents. Actual engineered structures dug into the earth itself. They understood something that modern engineers still use today. The ground is a natural insulator. Just a meter below the surface the temperature stays relatively constant regardless of what is happening above. No matter how cold the air gets, the earth holds its warmth. So they dug down. And what they built down there was extraordinary. At a site called Mazyrik in modern Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered the remains of shelters built entirely from mammoth bones. Hundreds of mammoth bones arranged in precise interlocking patterns to form dome-shaped structures. The bones formed the walls. Animal hides stretched over the top formed the roof. And inside a small fire kept the temperature at a survivable level while outside the world was frozen solid. These were not primitive huts. These were engineered survival machines. Built by people with no blueprints. No architects. No tools beyond what they could make with their hands. Just pure accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of living through the worst conditions on Earth. But shelter alone was not enough. They also had to eat. And this is where ancient humans demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that should genuinely shock you. During the Ice Age large animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos and giant deer were not just food. They were everything. Their meat fed the tribe. Their bones built the shelters. Their hides became clothing. Their fat became fuel for lamps that burned through the long dark winters. Their sinew became thread. Their tusks became tools. One mammoth could keep a tribe of 50 people alive for weeks. So ancient humans became the most sophisticated large animal hunters the world had ever seen. They did not chase animals randomly. They studied migration patterns. They understood that certain animals crossed certain rivers at certain times of year. They built drive systems. Entire networks of strategically placed humans who would funnel herds of animals toward cliffs or boggy ground where they could be killed efficiently. They planned hunts weeks in advance. They coordinated groups of 20 or 30 hunters across distances of several kilometers. They used fire to direct animal movement. And they cached food. When a hunt was successful they did not just eat until they were full and move on. They preserved meat by freezing it in the permafrost. They stored fat. They buried food supplies that they would return to weeks or months later. They were not just surviving day to day. They were planning for a future. And then there was clothing. This might sound simple. But the clothing that ancient humans developed during the Ice Age was one of the most sophisticated technological achievements in the history of the species. Archaeologists have found evidence of tailored clothing dating back 30,000 years. Not just animal hides thrown over a shoulder. Actual tailored garments. Multiple pieces cut to fit the human body precisely. Sewn together with bone needles and animal sinew thread. They understood layering. Inner layers of soft fur against the skin for insulation. Outer layers of tougher hide to block wind and moisture. Boots sealed against the snow. Mittens. Hoods. Every piece engineered to trap body heat and block the cold. In terms of function, the clothing ancient humans made during the Ice Age was not significantly different from the thermal gear worn by modern Arctic explorers today. They figured out the same principles. With bone needles and animal sinew. 30,000 years ago. But here is the thing that historians and archaeologists keep coming back to. The most important survival tool ancient humans had during the Ice Age was not their shelters. It was not their hunting strategies. It was not even their clothing. It was their stories. Because surviving the Ice Age required knowledge. Vast accumulated knowledge about which routes were passable. Where the food caches were. When the herds would migrate. Which plants were still edible in winter. Where fresh water could be found under the ice. No single person could hold all of that knowledge alone. So they stored it in stories. In songs. In rituals that were passed down through generations. Every piece of critical survival information was encoded into narrative form so it could be remembered perfectly and transmitted accurately to the next generation. The cave paintings of ancient humans were not art for art's sake. They were survival manuals. A painting of a mammoth hunt was not decoration. It was instruction. It showed the techniques. The formation. The approach. The moment to strike. Knowledge disguised as beauty. Passed down through 30,000 years of ice and cold and dark. The Ice Age ended roughly 11,700 years ago. The glaciers retreated. The temperatures rose. The world began to look something like the one we live in today. And the small group of ancient humans who had survived it all walked out of their underground shelters and into a world that was suddenly green and warm and full of possibility. They had outlasted the mammoths. The woolly rhinos. The giant deer. The cave lions. Every other large species that the Ice Age had tried to kill. Not because they were the strongest. Not because they were the fastest. Not because they had the thickest fur or the deepest burrows. But because they could think. And plan. And build. And teach. And remember. And because when everything around them was dying they sat together around a small fire inside a dome of mammoth bones. And refused.